I had a question from Mary about what's going on at Acton School. And Mary, I figured I would answer your question this way. I literally just rolled in from my nightly crawl up the 405 to the 14 and then to Acton. So here I am. This is it. This is where I sit down to unwind at the end of the day. And the kids are running around. You hear the pets, whatever, and this is it. So Mary's question was this. So understand people don't like the old board, but what is going on with Acton School? And is it true that the new school board did all of this work without appropriate permits, and now the school opening is delayed by as much as a year? So first, Mary, there is no new board. There's the old board and me. I've been on the board since December, the early part of December. It took a month to figure out who won the election. But prior to that, the board members were there for at least, in most cases, 3 years. So it's the same board, it's just got me now. So I'm going to do this government disclaimer that said, well, I wasn't there when this happened. That sounds familiar, right? So disclaimer aside, about a year ago, it was budget study session time. And the board is looking ahead at what assumptions are in the budget, what you do, and Acton School came up. There was a lot of money coming in from the charters at that time, so it was time to take a look at one-time projects and improvement plans and that type of thing. So I'm out in the audience and I'm listening to what's going on, and there's talk about Acton School, and there was a project list developed for Acton School. It talked about exactly what was going to do, what was going to happen, when it was going to happen, and it was part of what they called the 5-year plan. So in the 5-year plan, we're talking about construction, and superintendents have a lot of different things going on, but they all start off typically as teachers, or maybe a history teacher, maybe a physical education, whatever, and then they start getting into administration, and then sooner or later they work their way up through the admin chain and they end up being the superintendent. Now they may have some strengths, just like any of us do. We have strengths and we have things we need help with from others. Most superintendents are focused on academics and maybe not so much construction. Now if you were a large district building a lot of schools, then maybe your superintendent for that period of time would have a focus on education. Anyway, construction, excuse me. All things aside, there are some assumptions you can make if you're a member of the public sitting in the audience. And one of those assumptions is that the project that's a major construction project, the aspects of it that need to be permitted would be permitted. Just like if you were going to build a house, pour a slab, do structural modifications, drill a well, any of those things that we typically do at our houses. So maybe you're a superintendent doesn't have a lot of construction background. That's okay, because what you do is you develop the scope of what you want to do. What is it you want to do to the building? You want to expand, you want to rip out 2 classrooms and a library and put it in a boardroom and executive rooms, or whatever it is you want to do, you just put it together and you take it to an engineer and say, this is kind of what we want to do, design it, put specifications to it, and then you submit it to the Division of State Architect. Now, I have said Department of State Architect, and I was corrected, so I'm glad somebody can correct my vernacular even though they can't get permits from the place. Okay. So a year ago, I'm in the audience, I'm seeing this, and I'm thinking, okay, somebody's going to get permits. And I assumed that someone's going to get permits. And you know what they say about assume makes it out of you and me. So yeah, I'm the first one to blame. So work starts. Apparently they didn't get permits through DSA or have the engineers make submittals because guess what? DSA came by about a month ago, sometime in April, and said, hey, what are you doing? What are you doing? Immediately the rumors fly. Pfalzgraf turned us in. Why? Because Pfalzgraf wants transparency. Imagine that. There's another reason why. Well, one of my first tasks as the clerk of the school board when I was seated in December was to sign off on the high school paperwork that went into the state to say Everything had been inspected, everything was up to par, and it was ready for final paper submittal to the state. So I got on the phone, I called DSA, it's my signature, there's liability for board members. Anyway, there'll be a link below. This is a Cliff Notes version of this. There's a longer piece that explains all this in my April recap video, and there'll be a link to that below. So DSA comes by apparently, stops by the job, and says, wait a minute, we have no record of this. Our recommendation to you is that you stop work until you get the permits. Now, there's some confusion about, well, it was a recommendation to stop, it was a stop work order. Well, guess what? Legal will tell you in a minute, if you don't stop, there's liability, personal liability for the board members. Anyway, again, that's in my video down in the link below. Now, the superintendent who was there when this was all starting, and who was around during the initial, say, 6-7 months of this, went out on sick and then resigned, but was retained as a consultant. So even at the time DSA came in and said, you need to stop working, that person was still the consultant, consulting on the budget and consulting on the Acton School project. So our interim superintendent is all of a sudden faced with, okay, I've got a consultant and I've got board members, and there's a myriad of egos and whose fault is it and all that kind of thing. Face it, it's flat out embarrassing. So the interim superintendent does the right thing. Contacts DSA, contacts an engineer, contacts legal, and says, okay, what's really going on here, and what do we need to do, and let's get this rolling, and let's get construction started as quickly as possible. Now, there's different people with different ideas about what should have been done, and how the message goes out, whatever. Anyway, that aside, I think everybody notices that the work is stopped. We are under DSA's authority. They will decide when the submittals come in. So the submittals have gone in. The scope of the project really isn't any different than what was planned a year ago. Mary, bottom line is, somebody got the stuff a year ago, we wouldn't be in this position now, and I think the schedule was it would open in time for the 4th and 5th graders from Meadowlark to be there. But that's not the case. So we get updates. I think DSA is working with the district, and I think the main reason that happened is our interim superintendent and our board president, Mr. Fox, actually took the day and went down and saw the DSA people and said, hey, what do we do here? How do we get rolling ahead? And I think them doing that was a major step in building a good relationship where the oversight agency actually wants to help us. So I can't tell you the date right now, but I will give you a clip now from the last school board meeting where the interim superintendent is explaining to the board and the public that was there what's going on at Acton School construction, and you'll see the comments I make, and I assure everyone that the project was known. There's not huge type of construction. Some of the stuff I don't agree with. Like I said, I don't tear out classrooms and put in a library to put in something I can sit up on. I think you want to see my March or April video. I do a bit on the grandiose boardroom. But anyway, that aside, I'll end this clip by thanking you, Mary, for asking this question. And then now let's watch this bit from the board meeting where Mrs. Lato is giving us an update on Acton School.
We have an Acton School update. As you know, it's been discussed at the last couple of board meetings and the budget study that we are currently working with DSA on this project here. You mentioned that we hired an architect, and I just kind of wanted to update you since the last meeting so that we're all up to speed. We've equally hired an inspector of DSA regulations, and you'll see that contract in your packet tonight requesting approval. I want to thank Mike for attending the DSA meeting and going downtown with me. It was us, the inspector and the architects with DSA, working hand in hand to see how we can get back into action and what they needed to make sure that everything we're doing is appropriate. We found the meeting to be very productive, and I want to kind of stress that instead of making us do one big huge package for the entire campus, we were told that we could break it into sub-packages. So currently, so that you all know, we have our architect working on like a first kind of plan, and we were told that we can make an appointment immediately with DSA. They would look at that plan, and once approved, we can get back to work, take another plan, meet with them, work on that, and kind of, until we're done, kind of go through that motion, which was a big positive for us because it could have taken months sitting at DSA if we didn't get that approval. And lastly, I just wanted to let everybody know that I did work with the staff. We went and met with the Meadowlark teachers to keep them in the loop of the work that's going on here now with DSA. We worked with PTSO, Booster, and PTO from all 3 schools, and we had a district office staff meeting to make sure that everybody kind of knows where we are in this phase. Lastly, Will has tirelessly been sending blueprints, school construction documents, items I don't even know the names of, but I'm learning very quickly, to our architects so that we can get that first plan ready for submission. And according to today, the architect said that they're looking at probably going back to DSA with the first plan early to mid-June. And once we see what they say about that, we'll get back to work. Any questions?
More of a comment.
Yes, sir.
The scope of this project, just so everyone knows, was discussed in open session last summer. It was part of the budget development. It was part of informing the 5-year plan. If you were to look back at that document, you would see that the scope of the project was identified, as well as some cost estimates for each one of those projects. The process itself has not changed. Has not been the idea that we've done this, we're going to do this. It's been known all the way through. It's got to the point where there is a need for DSA inspectors on some aspects of the job. They're similar to the high school. There were some parts, and there's different specialties the inspectors have. You all know from my past experience as a clerk, I will call to make sure that everything is inspected, and I always report back that it is. But the idea that something is wrong or something, nothing is wrong. There's a list of prioritized projects. They'll be inspected. This person is a DSA inspector. And so it's just a matter of processing paperwork. Now, paperwork could have been filed before. Would it have taken the same amount of time? Yeah, so you're dealing with time, and you're dealing with an organization that we're just not in control of.